Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
And thank you for this interview.
My pleasure.
Right. Now, briefly, can you tell us something about this book entitled Transportation Revolutions, Moving People and Freight Without Oil? What is it about? And why should people living in cities care about it?
Well, it's important to think of transportation when one thinks of energy futures, because right now we have a transportation system that is almost completely dependent on oil for its power source. 95% globally of the world's mobility is powered by oil-based transportation. That's internal combustion engines, whether they run on gasoline or diesel, or jet turbines that run on kerosene. That's 95%. And so if we have an oil supply problem, we're going to have a transportation problem. Dr. Gilbert and I spent several years working on this book because we wanted to see whether we could actually solve this problem, or whether we would wind up in a sort of a dark future that some of the survivalist type authors predict, where society would collapse and we would be reduced to a pre-industrial mode of existence. We found that if we did take action, that it is possible to transition our transportation system to a future that moves people and freight without oil, hence the title, that this requires using existing technology. It doesn't require any breakthroughs in a laboratory, but it does require policy and organizational innovation, which we have not seen in the last 40 years. So our book suggests that the next 10 years are going to see more change in transportation systems than we've seen in the last 40 years, and that this change will be discontinuous, that it will involve sudden ruptures with current arrangements, and that's why we call them transport revolutions. So that's what the book set out to do, and we're guardedly optimistic that people who want to will be able to solve this energy crisis in our transportation system.
Well, look at oil price. Last year, it fell below $50 for a very brief period, early January, and today we're looking at more than $130 oil. And there are people who are saying that it goes up to $200 in the next couple of years. Do we have 10 years to deal with this issue?
I think we have 10 years to finish dealing with the issue. We certainly don't have more than a year or two to start dealing with it. And indeed we are. There are the parts of the transportation system that are most energy intensive, such as aviation, are dealing with it not all that successfully, but your audience may know more about Oasis Airlines, which also flew to Vancouver. The business model was based on cheap flying over a very long distances, which you have to get across the Pacific. They went out of business. That is a form of adaptation through downsizing. The aviation industry is scaling down even as we speak, and that's why we can't wait till the last airline goes out of business before we start dealing with this. But I think we do have time to begin to change our transportation policies and organization. And the single biggest change that has to happen, that our book worked through, is to move electricity into the mainstream of powering surface transportation systems. We can move 40% in our view of America's transportation. We use two countries to assess the future prospects, China and the United States. The feeling being that those were, in some ways, the most challenging examples. If Sweden, Switzerland, Singapore, and Canada were to all solve their transportation energy problems, but the US and China weren't doing anything, the world would still be in a crisis because they use so much energy and have so much economic activity around transportation. So we found that you could reduce 40% of the US oil consumption, mainly by moving large amounts of the rail system to electric power, by having electric powered trucks and buses and cars using different types of technology that already exists. This does not require any new inventions. It requires combining and rearranging existing technologies into new systems. And that is a form of transport revolution that is very similar to the last, most recent one. If one goes back chronologically, in the beginning of our book we talk about previous transport revolutions, many of which are old enough that people haven't been alive for them. There's only two transport revolutions that people who are my age or a little older will have lived through personally. And some of them may have missed one of them. One was the high-speed train revolution in Japan and then in Western Europe. That didn't really happen in other parts of the world yet. And the other one is the logistics revolution pioneered by Federal Express. And that is the most similar parallel to the kind of reorganization that needs to happen. FedEx and the model that it's set up for all the other logistics innovators, DHL and Purolator and the others, really involve taking existing technology, the same planes, trucks, computers that ran separately, and rearranging them into a linked system so that you could obviously send packages faster, more efficiently, and with complete knowledge of where they were. Those were the innovations that made FedEx and the logistics model into something that became a global transformation. And so we think there's a parallel with electricity. We can reorganize our transportation system by taking existing pieces and putting them together in new ways, just the way FedEx did with other aspects of transportation.
The only problem is this, politically, are these countries empowered to do things? Like the automobile and the retail fuel outlets, they're all over the place. How much political will is there in, say, America or China at the moment to say, look, we've got an energy crisis in the next 3 to 5 years, let's stop doing this for a while, divert resources to building transit, mass transit or rails. Are we even seeing any signs of that realization?
I think we're seeing the beginnings of that, but I agree with you that no one is prepared to jump first yet at this situation. That it's not an issue, unfortunately, in our view, in the U.S. presidential campaign. It should be. The energy crisis that the U.S. is facing will be the single largest issue that the next president has to deal with, and it will be larger than all of the others combined, in my view.
Including the credit crisis?
Yes. It's not to say, I don't believe that the entire credit crisis is triggered by energy, but I think it will overwhelm the initial credit crisis, and the two will be interconnected going forward.